How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And I know we're here to talk about building a better meeting, but I really wanted to kick off our time together today with a reminder that while it's easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle of the day to day, moving from meeting to meeting and project to project, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And so I encourage you while you're here to pause for a moment and ask yourself if how you're spending your day to day reflects your bigger picture vision for the future. You know, that story that you want to tell when you look back on your life. Are you collecting memories? Are you creating experiences? And are you making time for what matters? I hope that in addition to walking away with a few new tips to build better meetings, that you'll also leave feeling inspired to bring more intention to your days, since how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And lately, we've been spending more of our time in meetings than ever before. And if this rings true to you, put a 1 in the chat box and let me know if you feel like you have been in more meetings than ever lately. So in the last year and a half, the landscape of work has changed. How we work, where we work, and when we work. And boundaries have become blurrier than ever as work and home get blended together. And by the way, where is everybody from? Let me know in the chat box. I'm coming to you from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And it's just a testament to the fact that this new landscape of work has us more connected and working with people from all over than ever before. And as a result of this new landscape, studies have found that time spent in meetings have more than doubled in the past year, and that continues to climb. So not only that, meetings are getting longer. 30 minutes used to be the standard, but those default meetings are now starting to creep up to 45 minutes to replace the hallway chats and water cooler conversation typical of in-office work styles. 85%. With more meetings and longer meetings, it should come as no surprise that the average employee spends 85% of their work in meetings. So, does any of that ring true for you? More meetings, longer meetings? Let me know in the chat with the word yes if that sounds all too familiar. So, what do we do about it? Well, if you're here, then you're very likely a Clockwise user, so you're already on the right track. But let's be honest, meetings are just a fact of life. And with many of us working remotely or hybrid, or we're on teams with members that are spread all across the country or the world, we've got to be more intentional with our collaboration than ever before. So, how can we build a better meeting to make the most of the time that we spend collaborating? So Julia Child once said, a party without cake is just a meeting. I mean, who could go for a piece of cake right now? I certainly could. So besides serving cake at your next meeting, today we're going to dive into some simple ways to make our meetings more efficient, more effective, and more engaging. But you might be wondering, okay, who am I to share this advice on meetings and how we spend our time? So while I'm telling you a little bit about me, I want to hear about you. Let me know your job title and what company you come from, or what company you represent in the chat box, just so we can know who all's here. So to tell you a little bit about me, my name is Anna Dearmon Kornick, and I am head of community at Clockwise. And I have been putting meetings on the calendar for years now. So, in fact, I kicked off my career in the marble halls of Congress as a scheduler to a United States congressman, managing one of the most hectic calendars in the country, spending what felt like 10 to 12 hours a day rearranging appointments on a calendar. That was the norm for me. And gosh, I really wish I would have had Clockwise back then, but I fielded hundreds of meeting requests, speaking invitations, reception details, not to mention, committee meetings and votes, the whole reason why they're there. But After a while, I started to miss my home state of Louisiana. So I moved back and began a decade-long career in the high-stakes world of crisis communications. Hurricanes, oil spills, tornadoes, droughts, plant explosions, nonprofit embezzlement schemes, universities on the brink of financial collapse, you name it. And I have probably escorted someone down a freight elevator and into a back alley in order to avoid TV cameras waiting outside. As you can imagine, the 24/7 always on life of crisis communications really began to take a toll. So I walked away in search of a better way of life. And after diving into every time management and productivity book and resource under the sun, I became a time management coach, helping others create order out of chaos. And now I help busy professionals like you stop feeling overwhelmed and start spending time on what matters as head of community at Clockwise. So consider me your time management coach. And today we're going to work together to build a better meeting. And we'll do that by building meetings that are efficient, effective, and engaging. So let's take a look at each of those one by one. First up, efficient. An efficient meeting is one in which no time is wasted. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I am not a fan of wasting time. Let me know with the word no in the chat box if you agree. No, we do not like to waste time. And for an efficient meeting, everyone walks in prepared, aligned on the meeting's purpose, and ready to go. Discussion is concise and it's on topic, and the meeting ends on time, if not early. I mean, that sounds like a dream, right? So how do we make our meetings more efficient? Here are 3 simple ways to make your next meeting more efficient. First, establish a clear purpose. Also, create an agenda. And finally, sounds harder than it is, start on time. So first, let's talk about each of those 3 strategies. Clear purpose. When time is our most precious non-renewable resource, it's so critical that we make sure that every meeting on our calendar has a very clear purpose. And sometimes our recurring meetings, our check-ins, our one-on-ones, they can begin to feel a little bit like default. And after a while, we start to wonder, wait, why are we having this meeting at all? So one step that you can take to make sure that each of your meetings actually has a clear purpose is to audit your meetings. Take a close look at your calendar this week, next week, the week moving forward, and challenge yourself to identify your purpose for being a part of that meeting and the purpose of the meeting itself. You know, one of the things that can really get out of control sometimes is the number of one-on-ones that we have. And Clockwise has a really amazing tool called the one-on-one dashboard that can give you a bird's eye view of all of the one-on-one meetings that you have. So you can in one place, take a look at how you're spending your time in one-on-ones and evaluate if those meetings are still serving you. I'd love to know, one-on-ones, how many of you feel like sometimes one-on-ones are just taking over your calendar? And if that's you, just put one-on-one in the chat box and let me know. Yeah, one-on-one, you guys get it. You've been there. So auditing and making sure that those one-on-one meetings have a clear purpose can really help you be more efficient. And then next is to create an agenda. It sounds so simple, but a lot of times it's a step that we often skip. And when it comes to creating an agenda, templates are your best friend, especially if you have meetings that are on the calendar week after week. Having that set agenda where you move from one step to the next helps everyone get on the same page, stay on task, so you're in, out with decisions made and you're ready to move on. But just because a meeting was quick doesn't mean that it was effective, right? Oh, wait, let me tell you about this one. I almost forgot about the start on time. So the third helpful tip for making meetings more efficient is to start on time, right? And a lot of times whenever we step into a meeting, We like to start by, checking in with everyone, having that icebreaker chit chat at the beginning. And while there is definitely a time and place for that, a lot of time can really be lost at the beginning as we're waiting for others to make their way into the room, or as we're making our way for others to log in and join in the Zoom chat. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've definitely had those situations before where you're waiting and you look at the clock and you realize that 3-4 minutes have passed and you haven't even started the meeting yet. So I would encourage you to implement what I like to call the 2-minute rule, which is start the meeting 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes after the scheduled start time, so that everyone has an understanding that, okay, it's 2 minutes in, we're going to go. And if you're not here, then that should encourage you to begin to be more punctual and to respect the time that's scheduled. So, and I'd love to know if you see yourself using the 2-minute rule, just use the word two. Oh, I love that. Yeah. 1-minute rule if you want to implement it that way. But if you see yourself using the 2-minute rule, pop the number 2 in the chat and let me know. I'd love to know if that was helpful for you. And I'm so glad I didn't skip over that one. 0-minute rule, whatever works. So like I said, a meeting that is quick isn't necessarily a meeting that was effective. We need to make sure that we've got this balance of a meeting that is time well spent, as well as a meeting that accomplishes its purpose. And so an effective meeting is a meeting that accomplishes its purpose. If you're meeting to brainstorm, you're walking away with the ideas that you were looking for. If you're meeting to make a decision, you're walking away with that decision made. If it's a status update, there's a clear understanding of where everyone is in relation to the status of the project. And so there are 2 ways that we can work toward building more efficient meetings. And that starts with stating the purpose of the meeting and then wrapping with a recap. So let's take a closer look at each of these strategies. First, stating the purpose of the meeting. This looks like walking into a meeting, beginning your time together after you've used the 2-minute rule or the 1-minute rule or the 0-minute rule, whichever your choice is, and stating the clear purpose of the meeting. And you might think, okay, well, are you sure that's not a waste of time? We want to be efficient here. We want to make sure that everyone understands that, everyone should just know the purpose of the meeting. Unfortunately, that's just not always the case. We talked about when we kicked off our time together, how we're in more meetings than ever before. So many of us are in back-to-back meetings, and it's not unusual to log into a meeting or to walk into a room and think, oh, wait, what's this meeting for? So if you are leading the meeting, I encourage you to begin a new practice of stating the purpose of the meeting before you get down to brass tacks. And that could look like clearly stating, all right, guys, the purpose of this meeting is to make a decision about the ABC project. And then you get after it. Or it could be answering the question, what does done look like, especially if it's a working meeting? What does done look like, so that we can walk away from this meeting together knowing that we've accomplished its purpose. And then at the end of the meeting, these are almost like bookends. You start by stating the purpose, and then you wrap with a recap. Never assume that everyone in the meeting has a clear understanding of what those next steps are. You would hate to have a meeting and then need to have another meeting because what you talked about in the first meeting wasn't clear. So then you have a regroup, and then you have a touch base to make sure that everyone is on the same page. When if you were to take just a moment at the end of your meeting and restate next steps, restate assignments, who's handling what, and what deadlines are involved. Walking away from the meeting with these clear expectations set cuts back on future back and forth and make sure that everyone walks away feeling like the meeting was a success. So, okay, temperature check, green, yellow, red. Let me know. Green if it's a yes, red if it's a no, yellow if it's a maybe. Do you see yourself using these 2 tips, stating the purpose and wrapping with a recap to make your meetings more efficient? All right. Okay. I see some greens. That's awesome. I'm so excited to see that. Very green. Yes. All right. So finally, a meeting that's efficient and effective is definitely a winner. But if you're truly trying to build a better meeting, you're also considering engagement. And an engaging meeting is one that encourages participation. Let me know if you have ever been in a meeting and you're just zoned out. Just put the word zoned out in the chat. If you're not even listening to the meeting, you're physically there, but you're mentally somewhere else. You're checking emails, you're working on a project, you're writing, or you're in everywhere but right in, yeah, checking Slack. You're trying to be in all the places at once. And you're all the places at once. And what we want to do is create a meeting that is not only efficient, but also effective and engaging. And so there are some strategies that we can use to try and make our meetings more engaging. Gosh, Autumn, I feel you. Sometimes you just can't help but pop in and check on things because there are so many meetings until you're able to fully get those meetings under control. And so a meeting that is engaging sets participation expectations and it asks the right questions. It sets expectations for participation and it asks the right questions. So again, what exactly does this mean? Well, first, let's start with setting expectations. So after you state the purpose for your meeting, make sure that everyone participating is clear on how they should participate. Now, if you've been in a one-on-one with the same coworker for a year now, you may not need to set expectations for how they should participate at this point. But anytime you're kicking off a new meeting series, or even an ad hoc style meeting, you want to set expectations for how people should participate. If it's a Zoom meeting, do you want people to take themselves off mute and jump in? Would you like people to instead ask questions in the chat? Are you hoping, or would you like your participants to wait until a certain point in the meeting to give feedback so that the question and answer section is streamlined? The thing is that when you set expectations, even though it might feel a little rigid to set rules for how people should participate, what you're doing is you're making everyone feel more comfortable. And keep in mind that in any meeting setting, you'll have some people that have a preference for extroversion. You'll have those extroverts who are ready to jump in and share their thoughts and make sure everyone knows how they feel. And you'll also have people in your meeting that have a preference for introversion. You'll have those that like to take time to reflect and to really think through their contributions before jumping in to provide feedback. A lot of times our teammates that have a preference for introversion can sometimes their feedback can get lost in the shuffle because we don't set the expectations for how they can share, how they can participate, and create that comfort level. I bet you didn't know that we would be diving into personality today during our workshop on building a better meeting, but it really does play such an important role in making sure everyone feels comfortable, that they know how to share, when to share, and what you would like them to share. And that comes in by asking the right questions. And when we think about the right questions, of course, this is going to be on a meeting by meeting basis. But have you ever been in a meeting, or maybe it's just an email thread or a Slack channel, where someone just says thoughts, and then it's just completely open-ended? If you've ever experienced that, put the word thoughts in the chat box and let me know. It's just thoughts, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, I want to participate, I want to share. What do they want thoughts on? Do they want feedback? Do they want a critique? Do they want, Dominique, are you guilty? Yeah, well, it can be asking thoughts, or what thoughts do you have, can be it's an open-ended way to ask questions and open up for participation and hear what everyone thinks. But when you direct your question, and sometimes this takes some thinking in advance, what are the questions that I can ask? What are we really trying to solve here? And shaping your questions to make sure that those questions are open-ended, but direct. And so again, rather than laying out a problem and just saying thoughts, which can be open-ended and sometimes a little intimidating, I would encourage you to ask those questions that are open-ended and direct. Something like, how could we improve this piece of the project? Or what ideas do you have for making this project more valuable to our customers? Asking the right questions can definitely take some trial and error, and it can even be helpful to prep a few in advance so that you could even include them in the meeting's agenda, because we're going to make sure that we're using those agendas to be more efficient. So I hope this helped. I hope that this quick run through of 3 different ways that you can begin to build better meetings by being efficient, effective, and engaging has been helpful for you. And now I would love to open it up for questions. Laurie, do you have tips to engage customers in webinars? Absolutely. So one of my favorite methods for engaging customers in webinars is to ask a lot of questions. And I hope that this office hours webinar has felt engaging for you, because I've looked for opportunities to ask fun questions throughout our presentation. I was looking for opportunities to show how we're different, how we have different backgrounds, how we come from different companies, how we have different job titles. So we're representing just a wide swath of experience and backgrounds. And also asking questions that show how we're different. Where are you guys from? It's awesome to hear how many different, cities and countries are represented during our time today. So that's a really great way to ask questions, simple one-word questions, quick answer questions that can help you really create that engagement. Asking, how do you feel about this? Red, yellow, green, or if this sounds familiar, give me a yes. Those can be really fun ways. Laurie, I hope that helps, and I hope that helps feel engaging for your next webinar. All right, you're so welcome. Okay, next up, Rosie, what advice do you have for someone who is attending a ton of meetings, but is not necessarily the leader? I attend so many meetings that would benefit from your advice, but I am not the organizer or the leader. Rosie, I completely understand. That's a really tough position to be in when you see the opportunities for improvement and you've been equipped with the steps that you can take to improve things. What I would offer is that you begin to almost step into a leadership role yourself. And I'm not saying give yourself a promotion. That's not what I mean. I mean, any opportunity that you have to say, hey, would you like me to create an agenda for this meeting? Or asking at the very end of a meeting, hey, before we wrap up, can we just recap to make sure that we're on the same page? This is something that I've used in past roles in my career, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page by restating at the end. And so I would encourage you to see, how you can begin to be an example by volunteering, by offering to do things like creating agenda and asking those questions. And then you yourself asking those engaging questions in a meeting to kind of show what an engaging question could look like. Is that helpful? Awesome, Rosie. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I really, best of luck. And I really hope that works out. Okay, Autumn. How can you set and own these meeting expectations for all attendees when you might not be very knowledgeable on the subject matter? How can you preserve the operational authority? Okay, how can you set and own these meeting expectations for all attendees when you might not be knowledgeable on the subject matter? So, Autumn, one thing that's really great about the framework for building a better meeting is that it really has the potential and the ability to apply to any type, to anything that you need to discuss, to any project that you are discussing or that you're working on. And, one way that you can set and own these meeting expectations is just by before scheduling a meeting or before stepping into that meeting space, making sure that you're clear and confident on the purpose. So often it's easy to schedule a meeting. Oh, let's set up a time to talk about that. Or, oh yeah, we should have a meeting about this. I've definitely been guilty of that before, without really thinking through, okay, what exactly is the purpose of this meeting? Because the last thing that you want to do is step into a situation where the person that you've scheduled this meeting with says, okay, so what are we here for? And so I would encourage you to, before you schedule your next meeting or before you create your next agenda, make sure that you feel confident about the purpose. Because when you're confident about the purpose, when you're confident about the agenda that you've created as a way to guide the conversation, even if you're not knowledgeable on the subject matter, you will appear more confident, even if you don't know the nuts and bolts of the subject matter. Yeah. Oh, awesome. Autumn, I'm so, so glad. Thank you so much for coming. I really, really appreciate it. And let's see, are there any other questions? I would be, thrilled to take. Okay. What are your favorite ways to shut down stakeholders who are attempting to cause the meetings to go over time? Okay. Oh, that is a fantastic question. So, okay, what are your favorite ways to politely shut down stakeholders who are attempting to cause the meeting to go over time? I think the one thing that we always need to keep in mind is that we all want to be heard. We all want to make our voices heard, to make our opinions heard. And a lot of times, for some people, speaking up in a meeting is nothing. Speaking up in a meeting doesn't take psyching themselves up internally before they start talking. But for some, speaking up can be really, really tough, and it can require a lot of inner work before you're ready to start sharing. And so I think the first thing that I would say is to just remember that everyone wants to be heard, but we also have to make sure that our meetings are efficient and effective. And so first, when you have a clearly stated purpose for the meeting, when the meeting has a clear purpose, and when you have clearly stated that purpose from the get-go, it makes it so much easier to bring the conversation back to the stated purpose. The leader of the meeting, if you are the leader of the meeting and you're able to say, Greg, thank you so much for that point. I hear you. Let's make sure that we have enough time to address the topic at hand, which is this. And I'd love to talk with you offline. I've found that that's been a really great phrase to use. Like, I'd love to hear more from you offline about that. Or that's a really great idea. Let's talk about that offline. That can be really helpful. It's funny to tell you about a personal experience. I used to be a member of a nonprofit board of directors, and there were times that our discussion at board meetings would just divert all over the place and end up in the weeds, talking about details that just weren't relevant to the overall topic at hand. And so anytime we would catch ourselves, we had a phrase that we would use to keep each other in check. So this requires being in a group that has a lot of trust built in. But we would say, okay, we're discussing the color of the napkins. We're discussing the color of the napkins, because you imagine that we're there to talk about an event. Imagine you're planning a large event and you're trying to decide the date for the event, and all of a sudden you've fallen into a discussion, a rabbit hole, trying to decide the color of the napkins. We're not here to talk about the color of the napkins. We're here to talk about the topic at hand. And so if you have a group that you all know that you have a tendency to go off topic or to head off in another direction, sometimes having that shared saying that can kind of bring everyone back to focus with humor can be a fun way to do it. So, and I hope that was helpful to just always start by stating the purpose. That way you can bring it back to the purpose. Okay, let's see. Do you have advice on ways to suggest we eliminate or reduce the frequency of certain meetings that don't seem as relevant. Laurie, I love that. And you're going to be really excited when you hear about next week's edition of Office Hours, because that is exactly what we're going to be covering. But since I don't want to make you wait that long, although I do hope to see you in 2 weeks when we come back, advice for eliminating or reducing the frequency of certain meetings that don't seem as relevant. So first, this means that you've done a sweep of your meetings and you've begun to recognize, okay, this meeting has, you understand the purpose of each meeting on your calendar. And so when you deem a meeting as maybe not as relevant as it once was, challenge yourself to really articulate why it's not relevant anymore. And once you think through why it's not relevant, maybe the project timeline has shifted and you no longer need to meet as frequently, or maybe your team member has successfully onboarded and no longer needs a twice weekly check-in meeting. When you understand the purpose and when you clearly articulate the purpose of the meeting, that then opens up ideas for how to reduce or eliminate those meetings. And that can look like having a conversation with that individual. Let's say it's a one-on-one, to say, hey, I'm really proud of the progress you're making. You're really accomplishing big things here. I think that because you are really, standing on your own, you're doing a great job, that you would do fine with us decreasing these meetings to once a week. We can move it back to a once a week check-in. So that's one way that you can do it, is just by making sure you clearly identify the purpose of the meetings, understand why they no longer feel relevant, and then to address, with that individual or with that group, why you feel that that you could decrease the meetings. Another way to do it, if you're in a position to do this, if you're a manager who is overseeing the moving parts of several meetings, weekly check-ins, one-on-ones, ad hoc project meetings, sending out a survey. Just sending out a quick survey in Slack or a Google form and asking people to rate, really open it up. How important is this meeting, or how effective is this meeting? Because sometimes getting that feedback may let you know that, oh, wow, so this team really feels like this is a good use of their time. So maybe we should keep it up. So those would be two big recommendations, or two suggestions that I would make, is, like I said, understanding the purpose, articulating why it doesn't feel as relevant, communicating the next steps based on what would be the next best fit. And then second of all, opening it up for a survey. Okay, let's see. Want to make sure I see all these. Awesome. Okay, eliminate or reduce. Next up, I am personally getting tired of icebreakers before meetings. Since meetings have been so much longer and higher in volume, I feel they are unproductive. What are your thoughts on icebreakers? I think icebreakers have a time and a place. Absolutely. I think that icebreakers have a time and a place. I think that as a new team begins to, if you're in a period of growth and you're adding new team members and the team is evolving and changing and growing, that can be a really important time to do an icebreaker, maybe not before every single check-in meeting, but maybe once every 2 weeks, or maybe whenever you feel like the team has been working a bit siloed and hasn't had that interaction. And a lot of times, if you're in that manager role and you know what each member of your team is working on, you can kind of get a sense for, okay, I think this might be a week where we should kind of have some fun conversation. Everybody's been really head down. Let's lighten things up. Really treating it on a case-by-case basis instead of making it a standard part of the agenda. On the flip side, because so many of us are working remotely or in hybrid work environments, those icebreakers can be the only way for us to really get to know our team members. But, like I said, there's a time and a place. And instead of making icebreakers a standard part of the beginning of every meeting, I think that's when I would encourage, time that is specifically set aside for get to know you time. All of our time should have a purpose. All of our meetings should have a purpose. And if you are in a workplace where it is a part of the culture to kick off meetings with an icebreaker, make sure that you limit it to those first 5 minutes so that it doesn't drag out into a 15-minute long icebreaker before you're able to even get down to business. Awesome. Okay, I hope that was helpful. But I love a good icebreaker whenever we have the right time for it. Kathy, okay, awesome. And there is a great blog post. We were talking about calendar audits a little earlier during our time together about how that can be a really great way to reassess the purpose and the productivity of each of your meetings. And so I'm going to drop a link in the chat right now called How and Why Engineering Managers Need a Lightweight Calendar Audit. I encourage you to check that out and learn a little bit more about the calendar audit process. So here we go. I've seen another webinar where you shouldn't send an agenda beforehand, but rather show it at the beginning of a meeting for an effective meeting. Ooh, I think the reasoning was so invitees that are required don't feel the meeting is unimportant and skip it based on the agenda when the organizer really intended to have those individuals there. What are your recommendations on when to send or set the agenda? So first, before we address sending or setting the agenda, we've got to take a step back. Because if you are in a meeting culture where attendees have the ability to decline based on what they feel is unimportant versus important, that tells me that it's really critical to communicate the purpose for the meeting up front. This all goes back to stating the purpose, like making sure that each meeting has a clear purpose and stating it. One thing, Dominique, that could be effective is whenever the calendar invitation goes out for the meeting, in that calendar details section, you can actually state something like decision points and the key decision points that need to be made, or purpose. And you can maybe if you don't want to send the agenda in advance, just making sure that the purpose of the meeting is very clearly stated so that individuals understand why they're there and what they can contribute. That's so important to making sure that you're spending your time well, is that the people who are in the meeting understand why they're there. And a lot of times that can't be communicated just by an agenda, just like you've said, and just like you've experienced. So when that begins to happen, that's when you know that it's key to start communicating the purpose in advance so that everyone feels like their time will be used well. And then, so now that we've talked about that piece, setting the purpose in advance and communicating the purpose so that people show up, the next piece, when to set or send the agenda. It's really a case by case basis, and it depends on the type of meeting as well. In a one-on-one meeting, a lot of times the supervisor will have the direct report be in charge of the agenda, and that's a setup that I really like, because it makes that direct report take ownership of the flow of time, and that can be a really great way to cultivate their leadership. That can be a really great way to help them learn to prioritize and prepare for meetings to make sure that time is well spent. And so if the meeting is let's say very important and major decisions will be made, I think it's pretty critical to make sure that agenda is provided within 24 or so hours, so that people have an opportunity to review it, to prepare as needed, and to ask questions in advance. But if it's just a regular weekly team meeting, maybe a standing agenda in a Google Doc that's linked in the calendar details is all that you need. So I hope that that was helpful. You're so welcome. Okay, I see that there's a Q&A button. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so this is awesome. So Kathy, question from Kathy, which is, let's see. I'm moving some things around on my screen. So where can we find good templates for meeting agendas? Okay, that's a really great question. So it really depends on the type of meeting that you are aiming to create an agenda for. And very oftentimes, the best meeting agendas are created by the group. So let's say that you are creating an agenda for a recurring team meeting and you've never had one before. And so you decide to take a stab at creating a draft agenda. You know, you want to start by stating the purpose, and you know that you want to wrap it up by wrapping and recapping. And you can bring that to your team and ask, what are the key points that you really think that we should be covering each and every week? What feels right for you, in addition to, bringing your own ideas. But one really great place to store your meeting templates once you've created them is just in a simple Google Doc. I love having a Google Doc template that you have your recurring meeting on. And Laurie's sharing what works well for her is a shared Google Doc that's in the recurring meeting invite, and everyone adds their topic as they come to mind, so the agenda sort of self-creates. And Laurie, I love that. That works really well for some types of our recurring meetings, especially when we have that level of trust there with our team, and we know that they're not going to divert into the colors of the napkins, right? So that can be a really great method. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see. Okay, here's a question from Pablo. What do you think about setting a duration for the meeting as a way to better manage the use of time? Absolutely. Setting a duration for the meeting. So work expands to fill the time available is what Parkinson's law states. Parkinson's law states that work expands to fill the time available. So you always want to have a meeting start time and a meeting end time in order to you make sure that you're pacing the meeting and that you are moving through the meeting in order to hit your end time instead of letting things roll over. So absolutely, I would highly recommend setting a duration. And Sasha, great question. Has anyone used Asana? I have heard that Asana can be a really great tool to manage one-on-one agendas. You can actually create a project board for, awesome. I'm a big fan as well. Yes. You can actually create a project board so that you and the members of your team can, instead of updating a Google Doc, which is a fantastic option, but you can update a project within Asana to manage the back and forth of your one-on-ones or your team meetings. That works really well. And I'm going to take one last question from KK, which is, how do you handle back-to-back meetings over a 4 to 6 hour window that cover a wide range of topics? Oh my goodness. So first of all, my heart goes out to you because back-to-back meetings over 4 to 6 hours can be tough. I have certainly been there. So whenever you know that you've got a marathon day of meetings ahead of you, the best prep to make it through those meetings is to start the day before. So one of my top recommendations that I'm so excited to share it with you is called creating a shutdown routine. It's called creating a shutdown routine. So your shutdown routine is essentially the steps that you take, a short routine that helps you look at tomorrow, look at the day that's gone by, look back, look forward, and make plans. So during your shutdown routine, you can do a quick review of how you spent your time. You can look at, okay, what's unfinished? Am I on track to meet my goals this week? But at the same time, you can use that shutdown time to look ahead at the day coming, take stock of those 4 to 6 hours of meetings that you have, and do as much prep work, as much compilation as you can in advance. Back when I worked in Congress, we created each day what we called a day book for the congressman. That essentially was one book that enabled him to walk from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And it had everything that he needed in order to be completely prepared for each of those meetings. And so on those days that I have back to back meetings, I create a bit of a day book for myself, so that the day before I've laid out everything that I need to have ready to go. And I would love to share one tip for managing back to back meetings using Clockwise, and that is using smart meeting breaks. That is actually a setting that you can set in Clockwise that can give you some relief, so that you don't have so many of those back to back meetings. But sometimes it happens, and when it does, the best is to just be as prepared as you can, and to just do your best to keep your energy up and to keep rolling. So as our time is winding down today, I want to thank you again for being such an amazing group, for joining me for the very first office hours. And I also want to thank you for being so informative and for sharing in the chat, especially Dominique, the tip that you just gave to make some of those walking meetings, to give yourself a physical break so that you're still in meeting mode, but you're getting some fresh air. I'm a coach. And so before we go, I've got to outline some action items. All right. So if you're up for action items, put the word action in the chat box. And first off, I would invite you to tweet your biggest takeaway or share your biggest takeaway with the hashtag Clockwise Office Hours. And, I would love to know, you guys have been amazing in the chat and asking questions. Let me know your biggest takeaway with the hashtag Clockwise Office Hours. Next up, I encourage you to identify one thing that you learned today that you can take action on in the next week. Just one thing. We're not trying to rebuild every meeting ever today. We certainly could, but we're going to start with one thing. We're going to start small. Take action on one thing that you learned today. And finally, I encourage you to register for the next Clockwise Office Hours. Our next Clockwise Office Hours will be from 11 to 2, 11 o'clock Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern, depending on where you're located, on November 24th. So that's 2 weeks from now. We're going to be talking about how to take back your time by spending less time in meetings. Clear the decks, 3 ways to spend less time in meetings. And you can grab your seat at getclockwise.com/office hours. And Laurie, thank you so much for that feedback. Autumn, you too. Thank you all so much for being here. I've really enjoyed our time together. And if you have any questions, I can't wait to see you again next office hours to see what pops up. So thanks again so much for being here. Thank you, Autumn. That means the world. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming.